Welcome to the All for Literacy podcast, the podcast that brings together dynamic voices discussing the implementation, efficacy, and equity of science of reading transformation. Whether you are leading a classroom or a school building, a district or a dinner table, we are your literacy community.
It really created, you talked about the groundswell with these two teachers that were running, but engaging in the professional learning in this way is really, I feel like, what set fire to Federal Way with the science of reading.
You are stepping into a transformative journey where the science of reading lights the path to truly accessible literacy for every single student. Together, with knowledge and heart and the science of reading, we are unlocking literacy for all, one empowered student at a time. Hello, friends, and welcome to a new season of All for Literacy, the podcast that brings together dynamic voices sharing the implementation, efficacy, and equity of science of reading transformation. Whether you are leading a classroom or a school building, whether you lead an entire district or a family dinner table, we are your literacy community. In today's episode, we're sitting down with three educators from Washington State who have walked the walk of science of reading transformation and seen tremendous results for their students, their teachers, and their systems. Getting to know them and their story, I'm reminded of a poem by Marge Piercy, To Be of Use. And I'd like to share a few lines with you before I welcome our guests. The people I love the best jump into the work head first, without dallying in the shadows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. Thank you, Erica, Alyssa, and Tammy, for taking time out of your very busy schedules to be with us for this conversation and for doing the hard work of literacy transformation. We can't wait to hear more about your story. So to kick us off, I would love to ask each of you to tell us a little bit about your role in your district and your background in literacy that brought you to this transformation process. And what I'd love to do is start with Alyssa and Tammy. And then Erica, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about the district that the three of you serve. Alyssa, tell us about you and your background.
Hi, I am Alyssa Johnson. This year I'm teaching first grade in North Kitsap School District. But this time of transformation that we've been discussing today is from my time in Federal Way Public Schools. My role, I started as a classroom teacher there in kindergarten, and I taught kindergarten, second and third grade for many years before moving into instructional coaching. And then I moved from coaching into our Teaching for Learning department at the district office, supporting pre-K through 5 ELA instruction.
I'm Tammy Smith, and I have been an educator in Federal Way Public Schools for about 20 years. I came into teaching as a third career, actually, and was a middle school ELA teacher, language arts teacher, and then moved from that into an instructional coach, similar to Alyssa, and then from there to the district office. And my role is supporting our 6th through 12th grade schools and scholars with language arts curriculum and professional development.
I'm sure throughout the course of our conversation, we'll be talking about some of the distinctions and similarities between our youngest readers and our middle school and our high school readers, and what is exactly the same across readers and scholars, and what distinguishing features are important to know when you're undergoing this kind of transformation. Erica, please tell us about your role and tell us about how you came to this transformation.
I am Executive Director of Teaching for Learning. I've been in that role for 3 years, or actually now 4 years. And previous to that, I was a assistant principal in the district that I currently in Federal Way Public Schools. And then previous to that, I was actually a music teacher. I taught middle school band, and I landed into literacy a little bit of a different pathway. But it was actually through some transformational experiences at that middle school that I first taught at, where it was thrown right in to teach students how to read in an intervention class and didn't necessarily have the skills I needed to be successful. And since then, I've been chasing teaching literacy as well as leading for literacy now at the district level.
It sounds like between the three of you, you've served many different roles in the school district. You've all been in the classroom. You've all been in the central office. Erica, you've been a building leader. So you're able to come to this transformation understanding the importance and the interdependence of everybody in this system. Erica, will you tell us a little bit about the school district that you are leading and that Alyssa was and Tammy is teaching in and leading?
Yeah, so our district is the fifth most diverse district in the United States and has over 20,000 students and over 100 languages spoken as their first language. And in the district, we have been on a journey in reading literacy specifically. When I first arrived in the district, that was about 10 years ago, we did not have a guaranteed and viable curriculum in any subject area. And then we had a guaranteed and viable curriculum, and we adopted Lucy Calkins at that time, and also American Reading Company resources. And then when I moved up to the district office, we really went onto this journey for the science of reading and evidence-based literacy practices and transforming not only our curricular materials, but how we engage with our teachers in teaching literacy. And so it's been really a powerful experience for us to go through together. And also just to see over the 10 years that I've been in the district, the transformation in the classrooms.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you came to recognize the need for a shift from a Lucy Calkins balanced literacy approach to a science of reading based approach. Can you talk a little bit about who recognized the need for that, how those conversations were had, and how you were able to move those conversations into action?
Yeah, I would love for us to collaborate on this answer a little bit because I think it's such a special story. Before I arrived in Teaching for Learning department in my position, this conversation had started about letters. And that was maybe the first just initial conversation. But I think Alyssa might be able to share a little bit about the two teachers who really had a special story. So
so there's kind of two different pieces of information here. There's this one route. There was these two teachers in one of our elementary schools, a kindergarten teacher and a first grade teacher, who had really been going down their own personal learning around like the science of reading. This was all in that time frame that the Soul the Story podcast was coming out, and they had already engaged in a lot of learning, starting with I'm going to have to look it up real quick, but Making the Shift book. They started with that and engaging in that, and then that brought them to letters. They somehow found one of our sales reps and reached out to her directly, Kelly Cloud, asking, can we engage in this? How can we pay for this ourselves? And that's just not the model that Lexia has for individuals to participate without having the backing of a district or a cohort, a full cohort. And I stepped into this role at the same time that Erica also stepped into her role, and I kind of sat down and I had this like beautiful gift sitting on my desk as like, here's a next step for you to engage with. So it was on a to-do list of things for me to follow up on when I transitioned in the transition document from the previous facilitator to myself. And I got connected with Kelly Cloud, and that just got the ball rolling. From there, learning more about letters, were we going to start this professional development with, which Federal Way staff was going to engage with that first. So that was kind of one pathway that got started. Simultaneously, we were ready for a curricular review based on our curriculum management plan. And in kindergarten through second grade, we had Lucy Calkins as our guaranteed and viable curriculum. And that was already something we were supposed to review based on our curriculum plan. And we also had this same time of the Sold a Story podcast and all of the buzz around the science of reading and Lucy Calkins. So we knew, two different things were happening at the same time. We had these teachers that were wanting to engage in letters that put it kind of on my plate, at the same time of needing to review curriculum anyways, and knowing that we needed to find something that was going to be supported by evidence, and the evidence-based practices for our teachers, and put something in front of them that would be best meeting the needs of our kids. So those are kind of the two simultaneous paths that fell onto my plate as soon as I stepped into this role. And for that, I am very grateful.
So it sounds like the groundswell of initiative came from two different directions. There were teachers who were pursuing their own learning, who were recognizing that this Lucy Calkins-based curriculum and this balanced literacy approach was not yielding the results that our kids are capable of. And so they're learning more about the science of reading and what this transformation can bring, which brought them to Understanding Letters, which is Language Essentials for Teachers of Reading and Spelling, which is a professional learning series. For those of you who may or may not know about letters. And so you have this groundswell from teachers. And at the same time, the central office leadership team knows it's time to review the curriculum. It's time to review our investments. It's time to see if this is the right approach for us. And the central office team is also realizing consuming content around Sold a Story and recognizing the need to make this shift from a balanced to a structured literacy approach. Is that how you recall this time, Tammy?
Yes, for secondary, my story was kind of started when I was a teacher. I remember thinking as I came into teaching that I was going to do all this amazing literary analysis and have deep conversations about theme. And then I had students in my class that were reading many, many grade levels below 6th and 7th grade, and had some pretty big decoding gaps, especially with large multisyllabic words. And as part of my pre-service teaching instruction, I hadn't had any course instruction in phonics. Most secondary people don't have a lot of learning around how to teach foundational skills. So I did a lot of learning on my own, but I still didn't ever feel like I had a really good grip on the very best practices for intervention until in 2022, when I came across the What Works Clearinghouse Practitioner's Guide for reading interventions for students in grades 4 through 9. And so I really started a big push of kind of, my director at the time said, there you go, beating that drum for secondary intervention again, because we didn't at that time have a systemic form of intervention across our schools, and our teachers didn't have training. So when the Letters top opportunity came available, I said, hey, do you think that I could take Letters too, even though it's for, elementary teachers? I think that I could really benefit from the learning, and then find a way to focus it towards a secondary perspective. And so those were just some of the learnings that I engaged in. I started developing intervention, little mini series for our few schools that had intervention at the time. And it was a lot of just working one-on-one with teachers out in the buildings. And it was very small to start. Like, we're talking one school and maybe 4 teachers in the very beginning, and, teaching them how to do fluency, teaching them about the pillars of reading, and just all the elements of literacy. That's kind of where it started for secondary.
If I understand the story of Federal Way correctly, your first leap into professional learning and letters included classroom teachers, central office leaders, and a few secondary leaders. I think a lot of our listeners imagine professional learning or training as the teachers are here and they're all together, the building administrators are here and they're all together, and the central office team is over here and they're together. But that's not how you approached science of reading transformation. And would you talk a little bit about how your approach, which was a much more heterogeneous group of adults who were very curious about the power of science of reading, really helped facilitate the transformation that would come later?
So when sitting down and thinking about the investment in letters, Erica and I talked, thinking through who should we start this with and how are we going to best support it to make sure that we have that we're financially responsible. So we started with Tammy and myself engaging in letters as district leaders. The first cohort of certificated staff members included our kindergarten through third grade literacy development teachers. We call them K3 LDTs, sometimes just LDTs. And this group of folks, there's one person per elementary school, and they are a little bit of an instructional coach, a little bit of a working with students, modeling a phonics lesson, co-teaching. But they primarily focus in this K3 and just literacy world. And that seemed to be these are some people that we really would like to invest in to coach up and provide them with a strong professional development opportunity to build their skill set based on the leader that they are within their building. And then we had these two classroom teachers that really advocated and are truly the reason why letters landed on my lap in the first place. And I went to Erica and I'm like, can we please have these two teachers? Can we please? I think that they wrote a very lovely little persuasive essay to Erica saying, please let us participate. Because initially it was closed to classroom teachers. And I wanted to honor, we wanted to honor their, just go get-emness of wanting to invest in themselves. And we wanted to honor that. And really, it's the reason why our district ended up where we are is because of their pursuit and that they were just ahead of where the rest of our system was at the time. So they also got pulled into this cohort. I think that what was so wonderful about this opportunity is that we had these two classroom teachers that are day in, day out with their kids, living and breathing all of this professional development that we were getting. Additionally, we had our LDTs that are working with a small group because we did require the bridge to practice, and we required that they met with those bridge to practice students on a daily basis so that they too were having this opportunity to live and breathe with a small group of students that they were focusing in on. And then it was also starting to bleed out. All of a sudden, we started to see some of the phonological screeners, the past assessment that came from letters, and all of a sudden that was being done in a whole K2 band, but given by the literacy development teacher as they wanted to know more about their students. And so that's kind of how we spread it out. And it really created, you talked about the groundswell with these two teachers that were running, but engaging in the professional learning in this way is really, I feel what gave, I feel it's what set fire to Federal Way with the science of reading, that we had all of a sudden teachers being wait, how did you get that? What are you doing? And wanting to ask because they're seeing their students work on something with the literacy development teacher. And it brought up some really natural questions and really easy, great ins for conversation around coaching. And let me do a coaching cycle with you then around this. Our LDTs were starting to lead little professional developments in their building. And so it started kind of at this ground level rather than it being a top down where we're going to train all of our district leaders. And then we're going to have our district leaders train all of their coaches and then all of the coaches. And then everything slowly trickles down to teachers who ultimately are the ones touching kids. And we kind of did it in this middle out approach.
There are so many things that you said that are so compelling, and I think will be so important for our audience to hear and understand. One being simply that teachers were the people who said, what we're doing isn't working. We need something different and better. And here's the thing we need that's different and better. And that was a dialogue between the teachers and the central office leadership. And that was done in collaboration with one another. I think we don't hear enough of those stories about how frequently and respectfully that circle of communication really runs in so many school districts. Too, I think everybody on this panel has been a classroom teacher. Alyssa, I think you said you were back there. So that sort of open dialogue is really refreshing to hear. And Tammy, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about this. I hear a lot from leaders all over the country that if they had their science of reading transformation to do all over again, they would start with administrators, because you need leaders to understand the pedagogy, the practice. They need to have the vocabulary for leading transformation. And what you're giving us is a different kind of blueprint that's every bit as successful for how a district can take an idea, take a professional learning series, and really transform instruction for everybody.
The other thing that I think came out of that initial, the groundswell that came from the teachers, and like Alyssa said, people were starting to hear things. And of course, the Story podcast was blowing up at the time. So lots of people were interested in learning more. But I vividly remember, and I went today and got out my letters, volume 1, when we were doing unit 1, we made space for the LDTs to come and be together. And it was funny. We didn't do letters together. We all sat in a room with our headphones on doing our own letters work, but then we would discuss it after a little bit, and it just made space for people to have a set time on their calendar so they could make sure and get it done. And I looked back at it today because it was session 7 is all about early intervention. And it talks about having a 5-year literacy improvement plan. And I just was writing notes furiously everywhere, like, why don't we have this? We need a 5-year literacy improvement plan. We need kindergarten assurance. We need all these things. And then I told Alyssa, and I had a conversation, and we went to Erica. And that was kind of the beginning of our 5-year literacy improvement plan that we started developing because of that letters work and because of the initial interest. And it's kind of just really blossomed from there very quickly.
So, Erica, you are overseeing all of this percolating learning and all of this exciting transition that's starting. So what is your role at this early stage in the professional learning and the transition to science of reading?
So the vision piece is like, I love vision. I love making, solving complex problems, and really like enacting change, management. And so I think I was excited because I think with literacy just being such a great thing to focus on, when you have so many things in a district and initiatives and all these things that you can focus on, literacy to me, and the passion behind Tammy and Alyssa coming to me with this knowledge and their newfound knowledge, but not only their newfound knowledge, but all these cohorts of teachers and the cohorts of literacy development teachers having this passion. And so this is something that was ignited. And so I knew, and we had some big system changes to make. We're going to get after it. We're going to sit in, we sat in a room, and I still remember vividly the day that we really started this work. And we probably sat in a room for about 4 hours and really just mapped out and said, okay, what do we have curriculum wise? What do we need? What do we need to remove? What do we need to add? What is the professional learning? And we just started to really piece this all together. And I really have this image still from that day. And I even took pictures of it, just the raw footage of it, of the map of it, because it was a mess and it had all of these pieces and the puzzles. And I still go back to that picture because that picture is what drives the work to this day. Because we identified, in 5 years, we need to remove this curriculum, we need to add this. And so now, how are we going to get there financially? How are we going to get there with all of the teachers, with all of the admin? And just started to map it out in that way. And it's so authentic. And it came from such an authentic place and some passion from Alyssa and Tammy and the group. And so we just started setting up time on our calendars and just started to continue that work. So we mapped it out. And I think letters and Aspire were one of our first pieces of the puzzle, to really make sure that our teachers were equipped with the knowledge and the practices that they needed to drive the work. And so then said, how many years would it take us and how much money do we have each year and how can we capitalize on that? over time. And I think that was the first piece. And then we started getting after curriculum. What curriculum do we have that is not aligned with this practice, evidence-based practices? And then if we remove something, how do we actually message that? How do we communicate that? And how do we work through that? Because people are tied to current curriculum and the practices that they are enacting. And so to say, this is not evidence-based, and so, we're going to replace this. And so that's a real, it's a special thing that you have to kind of work through as a team in terms of messaging and how you bring people through that. Because at the end of the day, we are a people business. And so one of the things is that we had these groups, and these groups were definitely fueling this initiative. And I think that it's just special, and it has grown over the years. And we're now in year 4 of our literacy plan. And I look back, and I have a chart, and I look back at all of the things we've accomplished. And I think, all of the groups, and just this year, I said to Tammy, she has, 60 people who want to sign up for Aspire. And that's incredible, because there was maybe 5 at the beginning, secondary. And so just to see that inspiration, I think teachers really want to do best for their students and need the tools. And when you have such passion and knowledge base, they will follow, and I think make great changes for their kids. So it's been deep work. It's been hard work. But I think ultimately it comes down to it's the right work for us. And we've definitely had to do twists and turns to make it happen. And here we are now and telling this story.
When I come back, Erica, I would love to hear from your perspective how your vision had to transform also with this process, and how this wasn't simply, well, we'll do different professional learning. Well, we'll have a screener. Well, we'll change the curriculum. It was much more comprehensive than that. And I'd love to hear more about what that process was like for you. But let's give your throat a little bit of a rest. And I want to ask Alyssa and Tammy some more about something Erica was just sharing, which is that you mentioned that you had to transition from a balanced literacy district to a structured literacy district. And for some, that is an energizing and innovative change. That's what we've been hungry for. We are ready for it. And the more student success we see, the better we feel. And that is not how everyone enters into the change process. And there are certainly a lot of teachers and leaders who believed strongly in balanced literacy and were very comfortable in a balanced literacy environment. So would you talk to us a little bit about how you engaged that cohort to build their comfort and their confidence to make this shift?
I would start with saying that because we started with our K-3 LBTs, and that was we put it job embedded, as Tammy said. We set a time within their schedule. It didn't have to be completed outside their contracted time. And I also forgot to mention, we had a handful of reading interventionists also early jump into this. And then there started to get so much momentum that by the next time we had cohorts that we offered, we had some teachers that were able to opt in by our 3rd cohort. So our 2nd cohort was made up of the rest of our reading interventionists and our instructional coaches. And then our 3rd cohort that started a year later, after our 1st cohort, had our first group of opt-in teachers. And there had, again, just slowly, we just built momentum. So by the time some of our more reluctant teachers, that were sitting back to see what happens, have had a lot of evidence around them and a lot of energy around it. So I think that's one piece that really worked in our favor. By the time I launched cohorts in our 3rd year of this, I had about 100 people signing up for it. I think we had over 90%, I think 95% completed volume 1 on time, all 3 components of online bookwork and the in-person PDs. And that was something I was really proud of, because it was classroom teachers that had to do that all on their own time. And then we launched another set of cohorts this last fall. Of course, I am not there, so that's being continued on without me. But again, the amount of energy of teachers that were signing up for that, we were back up in the hundreds for another round of letters for 3 new cohorts that would start this fall. And I really attribute that to us starting from this ground level and letting just teachers opt into it, and letting one PLC member was a part of letters and being like, oh my gosh, I'm learning all these cool things, and this is what I'm doing in my small groups. And that has spread from there. I've lost my train of thought of the rest of the question, but I do think that that's been a big part of our success, is starting with just like the genuine excitement from teachers talking to other teachers. I'm seeing success with this kid that I just didn't know what to do with. Thinking about like some Federal Way had started, we had already noticed prior to letters, prior to COVID, we had noticed the need for phonics in our, like the missing piece of Lucy was a phonics curriculum. So we had adopted foundations from Wilson Foundations in the 1920 school year, was the first year of implementation of that. A bit of a hiccup with the pandemic with our implementation, but there had already been some steps to walk a little bit more towards an evidence-based approach by bringing in something that would support the phonics instruction that Lucy so clearly missed in our approach. So there was like some steps that were being made. And it honestly also, when talking about some of our resources, of like, how many of you have been stuck with this kiddo that you just don't know what to do with? The anecdote I always seemed to give, I taught 3rd grade for a long time, and I always had students that would get stuck at this one reading level that we had. We had American Reading Company's ERLA, and the 2R is 2nd grade, and white is supposed to be 3rd grade as far as the colored reading levels. And one of the entry requirements is to know that CH makes the sound in like schedule. And we would work on that and work on that and work on that. And then I would open up a book to try to have a kiddo like show that they remembered it. And it wouldn't be anywhere in the book that I was putting in front of them. And then going through letters and finding the percentage of words that have the CH makes a k sound are so small. And then like the etymology behind that gave me such a leg to be like, oh, now I understand. And how I think about all those students that I worked with, you know, playing with letter tiles at my U table without ever giving some like, this is like, these are the types of words that you're going to find it. And I could have just done so many different things had I known, and I just didn't know. And so I think by leading from such an authentic place with teachers, of telling all of my anecdotes of what I did with my kindergarten, 2nd and 3rd grade students, and the teachers in the room also being like, yeah, I've done that so many times, really helped also kind of lower the affective filter of it's scary to admit that for the last however many years, maybe I've been doing this wrong.
Well, I think you're in good company with other district leaders who have undertaken this transformation, because it really levels the playing field, because the overwhelming majority of us did not have any preparation in the science of reading to deliver on this kind of instruction. So the pedagogy, the practice, the components, it's all new. Maybe we had a little bit because we brought in some phonics, but we didn't have the vocabulary for the rest of it. And there is something that allows all of us to say, okay, we are truly a learning organization. We are truly a learning culture, and we all show up to do right by kids, but we did not have the right tools and the right tools to do that. And we were originally talking about how we appealed to the people who were still committed to a balanced literacy community, in part for what you were just saying, Alyssa, because first of all, change is hard and change can be uncomfortable, and letters and Aspire professional learning are very demanding and challenging. That's very demanding and challenging learning. And to admit this change is necessary is to acknowledge that what we've been doing hasn't worked, even though we know it hasn't worked because our data has told us that. So Tammy, would you talk a little bit, particularly for secondary teachers who probably didn't realize they were undertaking the role of literacy instructor when they became content experts?
Right. I will say one more thing for Alyssa. She's not tooting her own horn enough, but Alyssa was really, really organized in her management of the letters cohorts, and like created a schedule for their pacing and sent out weekly reminders to them, and just was very, very supportive. So it was easy to not get behind. And I kind of followed suit. I copied all of her ideas when we launched Aspire. And like Erica said in the beginning, it was like kind of begging teachers that I knew really well, like, hey, I know you love to teach reading. This is some really good stuff, and you're going to get a bunch of great evidence-based resources to use with your kids. Will you just try it? We also, as a district, offered a stipend. So that was if people finished all the required coursework and we had them turn in bridge to application or bridge to practice artifacts that they had used with their kids. So that was another, something to reward them for the hard work that they were doing. But, my first cohort, I think, was about 20 people. I didn't manage them as effectively the first year. The second year, I was much more structured in sending out weekly reminders and even designating like a federal way pathway. Like I went through the 31 courses in Aspire and picked the ones that I felt were most applicable to our context. And they needed to finish at least 22 of those to earn the stipend. And so kind of the same way as in the elementary level, at the secondary level, as people started using the resources, our district is very big on PLC work. And most of our schools have built-in time in their day for PLC. We also have early release Fridays. And so people would see what other people were doing in their PLC and be like, hey, where did you get that? I really like that. And it just became a buzz that Aspire is this great thing. And I'm so excited. This year at our August professional development, we had a 2-year committee that has worked to create a master schedule that's systemic across our system. Every middle school has the same master schedule. And we have MTSS directed planning time for our middle school teachers. And we now have 3 days of intervention built in at every middle school. So I had a gym full of about 150 teachers that I was teaching about the pillars of literacy and best practices to be doing with their kiddos. And they were excited, and spontaneously about 5 of my other teachers volunteered to say things about Aspire and how it had changed their teaching and how all their resources were so wonderful. So like when you hear your peers talking about things that are actually having success for kids, it just makes you want to find out more about it. We really haven't had much pushback. That it's going to be a learning curve this year with the MTSS Tier 2 time, but I'm super excited because it's something I've wanted for a long time.
So teachers really are the very best ambassador for professional learning and the science of reading, and students and their progress, and students having the vocabulary to move on. It sounds like both of you really made it your business to make it as comfortable and easy as possible for teachers to prioritize this learning for themselves with all of the other things that teachers have to do in a day. You said, let me make this easy for you, so this is something that you can really master and bring into the classroom. And in doing so, I think it kind of takes us back to what you were starting to talk about earlier, Erica, which is that to truly transform literacy such that outcomes for children improve, teacher efficacy and happiness improves. It's much more like an engine than a straight line. There are so many components. It's not simply a learning series or an intervention or a curriculum. Tammy, you talked about needing to make changes to the schedule, the middle school schedule and PD days. Would you talk a little bit, Erica, about those systems changes? First of all, how did they even become clear to you? How did it become clear to you that you were talking about more than a professional learning series or a particular curriculum? how did you identify some of the components of those systems that would need to transform with the learning, the teacher learning?
Yeah, so I think going back to just that first initial day and thinking about if the professional learning is one piece, that's, the teacher knowledge component. Now you could have that knowledge, but you have to have a system now to implement that change. And so that is kind of where we came up with, you have a bridge to practice, and, you have a small group, and everybody's expected in letters and aspire to have, you're trying out what you're learning about with your small group of students. And so that was a piece that I felt like was a really great leverage point in terms of thinking, now, how do we actually make sure that this learning is getting to the student outcome piece? And so the bridge to practice piece was one piece. I was like, okay, that could be an avenue. That can be a vehicle there, because we can build on that. We can take data there. We can actually track progress over time. And that's something that we say, because we can have professional development. We can say, you go to a session, and I have never personally been to a session where I'm like, that professional learning session, that one time I went, transformed my practice. Not one. And so when I think about professional learning over time, it's all about, okay, I have this professional learning experience. Now, how do I actually implement it? Now, not only did I try it out, but now how do I sustain that over time? And I think that's really where the change happens. And so thinking about that just in the professional learning, I think was maybe the step one. But then it was, okay, so now we have this teacher knowledge. And so now, what are the curricular materials that we're using? Do those curricular materials actually align to what we're learning about in evidence-based practices? And so that was the conversation. And so then thinking about that system, thinking about our administrators and how to really support our administrators in leading for this change. And their teachers are getting this teacher knowledge piece. They're getting this learning. How do we ensure that our administrators now can also lead for this change with new curriculum, with new evidence-based practices that they may have taught differently than the evidence-based practices themselves. And so how do we support that change? And so I remember sitting in the room with actually Lexia supported us with developing kind of our 5-year plan. And we talked about all of those cogs, so the cogs that really make that engine move. And so thinking about the professional learning, thinking about the systems of the money, in terms of how are we going to pay for all of these things? And then over time, so sustainability, thinking about now our capacity as a district office and leadership staff of now how much can we truly lead? And I think we really pressed our limits in the early stages for sure. And, Alyssa and Tammy are nodding right now because we knew we had some pieces in place that we could really thrive on. And that was that we had the energy right then and now. And we didn't know if we would always have that. And so we were going to capitalize on that. And so sometimes I think you have to kind of be reactive a little bit to what you're getting from the system and adapt. Whereas I think all of us would have preferred to go a little slower at the beginning, but we knew that if we didn't capitalize on this, it actually might end up being a longer journey at the end. So we made some intentional decisions. And I think I remember saying to Alyssa and Tammy, are you sure? Are you sure you want to lead 2 adoptions at the same time? And both of them said, they took a big sigh, and both of them, I think, said, yes, we do. And we really to this day, I think back to that. And I think it just took a lot of work to get all of those systems in place. And you have to have people come together. And really that's this group of 3. We came together all the time and really looked at all the pieces as a cohesive system versus just saying, not just professional development, not just an assessment tool, or not just implementing a curriculum. This is a whole system change. And I think every opportunity, professional development, didn't just live in letters, didn't just live in Aspire. It lived in everything we did. And so I think through the adoptions was also a transformational experience. And both of them led curriculum adoptions with very large groups, which is unusual. And we allowed that because I think we wanted the teachers there. We wanted them to engage in the learning. And typically our adoptions are very, small groups of teachers who are piloting a curriculum. They come together as a committee. But we had so many, I think 130 teachers who wanted to do this. And so then Alyssa had this large group of K2 teachers and used that as an opportunity for professional learning as well. And I think that was also something that propelled us forward. So it wasn't just these isolated experiences to make the big change, because I think if you just say, yes, we're implementing letters, I'm not sure that that would necessarily lead us to where we wanted to be without the rest of the components. Because then where's the implementation? Where are the student outcomes? How do we know their accountability factor? How do you collectively come together as people who have engaged in the letters or engaged in the learning together to continue that practice? So it has been many systems and many twists and turns, but I think we always stay like focused on where we are now and where we want to be, and then like how to get there in terms of incremental steps. And we really broke it down in different levels of professional learning and assessment, curriculum, and it just took a team to come together, and we carved out the time to make sure that that happened.
You're speaking to such an interesting irony of teacher professional learning right now, which is so many communities, so many districts are so worried for our teachers. You know, they're so stressed about the working conditions. They are exhausted. Our talent pipeline is dry or hurting. And so there's this fear often in leaders that, well, we can't ask them to do something as large as taking on 2 years of science of reading professional learning like letters or something like Aspire. When actually, when teachers have the tools they need to reach the kids they show up to serve and teach every single day, it is so energizing. It is so exciting. It makes the work more efficient and more joyful because you're seeing the outcomes in terms of students. And I want us to be able to get to students and student achievement. But before we do that, I want to talk candidly about sustainability, because something else that a lot of districts grapple with, especially when they're talking about teacher professional learning or administrator learning, is, okay, but then people leave. Okay, but then people quit. Okay. Well, that is true in every profession. You go anywhere, nobody has 100% retention. Life changes. And right here on this small but mighty panel, we have Alyssa, who was a key leader in this transformation, and who has moved on to a different district. So I'd love to hear from each of you what sustainability means now, because people will always shift and move. Something you said earlier that I think is so important in so many districts, people change roles and then go back into other roles. You might have a classroom teacher, becomes a building administrator, goes to the central office, and then goes back to being a building administrator. Or someone might start in the central office and say, I've never even been in a classroom, and go right to teaching. And it really creates more collaboration across those lines of leadership. But what I'd love to talk about is sustainability, especially when we know people are going to leave and they're going to change roles. So how do we sustain the work under those circumstances?
I can start on that. I think one of the things is I think we're building leaders as we go. In this process, 3 years, 4 years ago, we would not have been able to, with Alyssa's transition, would not have been able to sustain the movement we have. But through the process, we have built leaders. And so one of the things I think about is just in Alyssa's, when now that she's back in the classroom, we have a leader who stepped up, who Alyssa worked with tightly for 3 years, who is now leading the same work. And the system is in place that Alyssa really set forth in terms of, for letters specifically, in terms of how she managed the weekly emails and the accountability and the stipends and all of those things. So she could really take it as a playbook and run with it. And so that's just one example of many that we're building leaders as we go. The person who is now in her position, in her previous position, was also built in as a leader in this work. She was part of the adoption processes and was at the site level. And so I think as you go, you start to build leadership capacity across the system. it becomes something that is part of the system and not necessarily something you're trying to fill, because you have people who are ready to step in and ready to lead that work. And so that is actually a critical part of the actual planning process as well. And I think we even talked about, Alyssa, we knew that at some point she would be moving on for her family. And so one of the things is we had talked about that early on is how will we, kind of sustain this throughout. And that was one of the big things that we talked about, was just how do we develop our own capacity as a system. So that's one key piece. The other piece is just making sure that everything is done with intention versus reactionary. And I think a lot of times we say, we see this problem and we find a solution so quickly. And I think for us, we've sat down and we've done like the deeper work to really make sure that we're evidence-based practices. We understand the pieces at the deep conceptual level, that we can make really intentional decisions and make sure that we are on that path sustainably, versus just saying, okay, here's the problem, and now this solution costs this much money, but might actually cause different problems down the road. So being really intentional and having it memorialized in a place. So I think that's one of the things that we have is like with that 5-year literacy plan, I'm constantly going back to it, referring to it, making sure that we're in alignment. And if something is off track, there might be a reason, but we would say, is there a reason? And do we need to modify and adjust? But we aren't going so far off that path. We know in 5 years where we want to be. And we know that in each of those phases, like in each of those cogs. And so as long as we stay true to that, no matter who comes and goes, they could pick that plan up and they can run with it.
I can go next. Kind of going off of what Erica said, Erica with her, like how skillful she is at visioning is just like not a skill set that I have, but I'm really good at filling in the details. So when she's telling us that we're setting up a system and that it was important that for the sustainability and something that I'm pouring blood, sweat, and tears into this baby. I don't want to give my baby up to be a toddler raised by somebody else, and yet I need to. And so setting up a system in which I felt confident that I could turn over this piece and someone else could pick it up and might make it their own a bit, but at least the skeleton is there to make sure that it didn't just fall flat when I transitioned out of my role. And that was a really big piece of it. Knowing that we are going to have teachers leave after a year, as much as I tried to promote, that this is a 2-year commitment. Technically, they click a button saying, yes, I'm on board for the next 2 years. But life happens, and we know that it happened for me and took me out of that role and put me into this first grade classroom. So we know that life is going to happen. And I'm honest with participants that life happens as it should. And yet your students are still going to benefit so much this 1 year, even if you only get through year 1. That first unit is such a foundational unit with all the research that supports everything else that comes after the first unit and letters. And even if you just get that and understand some of the brain research is wonderful. So our students were going to benefit regardless if we got the full return on investment for a completing of the 2 years. We knew that our students were going to be benefiting from whatever engagement level looked like, if that was just for 1 year or if that was for both. Additionally, knowing that in our balanced literacy world that we've been living and breathing for so long, volume 1 is the one that's going to give so much information that our teachers may not have. I felt like I went into it knowing that we're going to have teachers that start in year 1 and committed for 2 years, and they're going to leave after year 1 because life took them in another direction. And that was okay, because our students are still going to benefit from them having the knowledge set that they gained from just even that first volume. And I just had to rest on that. And someone else's kids are also going to benefit from that. And I love that as well.
Tammy, when I think about middle school, I think the ground is almost more unstable than it is stable. There's just so much movement and transition. So Talk a little bit about what sustainability looked like, or how you came to make peace with what sustainability was going to look like on a secondary level.
One thing that I feel like Federal Way does a really good job of, not just our system for this, like our systems in place for our literacy improvement plan. I think Federal Way as a district does a really good job of having just a systemic lens for everything we do and thinking about how whatever initiatives we start, how are our people going to be supportive? How is our implementation going to roll out? What does it look like across our whole system? And so I've just been reflecting on a lot of the professional learning we did in August. And we hear over and over from new teachers that come into our system how supported they feel. And like all the guiding documents and the pacing and the supports. And then I think also our focus on PLCs. We have pretty strong PLCs in the secondary. We also, as Erica mentioned, I think in secondary, we've done a really good job, well, elementary too, but of growing our leaders, teacher leaders from the buildings into those instructional coach roles. Right now, I was thinking about all of our secondary instructional coaches, except one, were homegrown and came out of our classrooms. So we've just done a good job of leveraging the talent that we already have and supporting people to want to stay here. We had very little teacher turnover at secondary. In fact, in high school, we didn't have a single new language arts teacher this year. And in middle schools, across our middle schools, I think we only have 5. So knowing that they're coming into this role where they're going to have an instructional coach, which not every district has at every school, and they're going to have PLC support. And now we have this MTSS directed time twice a week where they're getting a full hour of planning time together with their whole team, supported by their coach. I just think that really helps promote stability.
We always want to focus on what's working and what is possible, and invest in the energy and the joy of teaching and transformation. And the reality of transformation is that it can be very messy and very frustrating. And if it were that easy to do, it would be done. And so I would love for you to think about and maybe share with some of our listeners points along the way where you encountered obstacles. Maybe you anticipated them, maybe you didn't. Or maybe you suffered a setback and said, I don't know if this is going to work. And talk about what that was and how you worked through that individually or as a team.
I don't know. At secondary, when I think about our middle school adoption, we just have implemented so many things at once, and we know people's capacity for change. They can only learn as much as you can learn at a time. So we got a brand new curriculum. We brought Power Up on board. Now we're doing reading intervention, and teachers that are social studies teachers and science teachers are going to be teaching a comprehension, vocabulary, and fluency class. And so I think people can start to get overwhelmed with the amount of change. So making sure we're finding a balance between how fast we're rolling things out and the expectations we're setting, and just giving people grace to learn and to be messy. And that's okay. I think it has been something we've had to grapple with.
I always believe that it's going to work. It's just a matter of how you get there. Because sometimes you will get roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, but I think there's always a pathway through. And so I think like in all of this, I don't even know if I would say that there are setbacks. I think in some ways it's you find your path and you keep, you just know that at the end of it, you know where the light is, like where you're headed. And so, a couple examples that I can think of are just financially. I think that's probably one of the biggest barriers to this work is identifying, how to sustain that over time. And so I think that piece though is I think we've done a nice job of saying, okay, like how can we reduce somewhere to make sure that this happens somewhere else? And just kind of moving some pieces around. And then thinking even this year is that with the Aspire, we have so many teachers who want to do this training. And it's unanticipated that so many, and it's such a great challenge to have. And I just refuse to give up on the fact that we want to make that happen. And so I'm still searching on trying to figure out how that will happen. And I think that's kind of how I operate in the system And it may not always happen on my timeline of saying I want them to do it right this second, because they want to do it now. But, maybe down the road in the winter, I find a solution. And so I think for me, it's less about having these setbacks of really truly setting you back, but finding a new pathway forward.
And sticking to the plan and coming up with a way to walk toward the light. And you identified significant obstacles. We have, some teachers who are reluctant to make a transition. We have financial restraints. We have logistical constraints. The daily schedule is not always conducive to fitting in teacher learning, teacher planning, co-planning, data analysis, and student need. And just addressing those one at a time as they came up as a team in service of this learning, this kind of learning, the science of reading-based learning. Could you share with us some student success stories? Are you at a point in your science of reading transformation where you can say our students are beginning to benefit from what their teachers and leaders know how to do?
Being out a federal way at this point, it's hard for me to give really concrete, specific student data. However, I do know that we were looking very closely at our teachers' data and their student growth, and just comparing them, raw data of a teacher that has engaged in letters and a teacher that has not yet engaged in letters. And that's where we were starting to see some things come out in our data. Erica, I think, maybe had said it best last year when we were looking at some of our diagnostic data of we were starting to see outliers, and in a positive way, that we're starting to see what is happening here. And for so long, our data has just been so similar to everyone else. And so it's really hard to pinpoint what's going right and what's something that we need to shift, and starting to see some outliers in our data.
One thing that I'm really excited about is last year was a implementation year for us with new ELA curriculum for 6th through 8th grade. Well, for 3 through 8th grade. But, and usually in an implementation year, you're going to see a dip in your data. And we didn't. We saw an increase in overall ELA state assessment scores and I-rated growth scores. And in the middle school, both 7th and 8th grade, it was pretty significant. So that's very exciting to me that our data is showing this story that what we're doing is we're on the right track. It's working.
And I will say that both Alyssa and Tammy each have individual stories that kind of come out throughout the year from teachers who say that they're working, with students and they have these positive outcomes. And I think they probably, I think every time they come, the teacher is excited to share that their students are getting a new concept or skill, and they attribute it to the learning that they've done in the past year or so. So that's really exciting to see as well.
That is really exciting. So please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe throughout the course of this transformation, Erica, in your extremely relaxing job leading all of this transformation, you were also writing your dissertation and achieving your doctoral degree. So first, congratulations on your doctorate. That's a huge achievement, and I'm really happy for you. Would you tell us a little bit about what you studied and what your study showed?
Sure. So I actually studied letters, specifically on outcomes of student achievement. And so really looking at a lot of the things I discussed today. So thinking about all of the pieces of the organization. So teacher knowledge, the system change, and then those impacts on student outcomes. And so what I really learned is what I did is I took our student data from those bridge practice groups that the students, that the teachers had from letters. And basically I followed those students throughout the time that the teacher was in letters, and followed them in terms of their individual achievement data on our iReady, as well as their state assessments. And then also just matched it up with the amount of hours that the teachers had in letters. And so looking at specifically outcomes. And then it was really a great opportunity to have conversations with the teachers who are engaging in the professional learning, as well as like Alyssa and Tammy, and the systems change on what were the systems that really made an impact on their learning and what they felt as an individual like impacted their student outcomes as well. And so some of the things that came up for like the organizational factors were really around the systems that we put in place that we talked through today, were the accountability of those weekly emails that came through, from Alyssa, every week, this is what you're up to this week. And next week, here's what's coming. Make sure you're keeping on track with your bridge to practice and making sure that's done with fidelity. And so those things, and then also just the continued collaboration time and the time and space to do so. And like Tammy had said, coming together in a room, even if you weren't actually collaborating face to face, having the headphones in, just doing the work together. So looking at multiple organizational factors and then looking at the teacher knowledge specifically. So does an increase in teacher knowledge make an impact on student outcomes? And so I did that very early on in this journey. And so looking at the teachers that we had, the sample size was actually mostly like our literacy development teachers, instructional coaches. And I would love to like replicate the study now that we have so many teachers in practice, because I think we would be able to see such great results now with the classroom level data than where I was at the beginning. And it would just be fascinating also to see the change over time of like the organizational factors, because we learned a lot throughout that process as well. So many of the things that we talked about today in terms of the 5-year literacy plan was really like right in alignment with my study in itself. And as I was learning and gathering data from individuals, that actually also fueled some of our planning too. So it was really exciting to go through that process, and it really went hand in hand, and we learned a lot from just the student data as well as just talking with teachers, and it was exciting to kind of put that all together.
So in terms of some concluding thoughts, if you were going to offer advice to other district leaders who are looking toward a science of reading transformation, who recognize the need and maybe are not sure where or how to start, how would you advise them?
One of the things that I am just most surprised by still, it's been 4 years now that I still like look back and like, I can't believe how beautifully this all seems to have worked out. That I don't know that there is anything that I would change about the way that we did it in Federal Way. And so that is what I would lean on, of start with your like critical, not principal building leaders, but these like critical classroom teacher leaders, and lead with them, but learn with them. The conversations that were had, like in our face-to-face in-person PDs, that we're hearing some information delivered to us in our professional learning sessions that is, restating some things that we've done in the online component and we've been reading, but now it's also being said to us that is directly not yet aligned to where our district was. And the teachers like looking back at me of like, Alyssa, what are you going to do about this? And like the conversations that then we were able to have then and there with people closer to the work than I am, that it led to some really meaningful conversations. And I think that that's what led for that kind of wildfires, to find who's going to help you spread the wildfire and lead through that. And I wouldn't change the way that we did that. I think that our success with classroom teachers being successful with their completion of letters and their commitment and investment in themselves. And I was also really honest with them of that this professional learning is an investment in you as a professional of your classroom, that we are trying to build you to be the curriculum proof teachers, that I could never, as the district leader, put a perfect curriculum in front of you. But I can put a curriculum in front of you, and now with all of this professional learning that you have, feel so confident that you can take that and meet the needs of the kids in front of you. And I leaned in on that heavily, of like my relationships with these teachers, of we are investing in you to be the professional, and while our stipend is not probably enough, but we are also honoring that you're a professional and you should be paid for this investment. And I want to honor the time commitment that Letters is. And I think that went really far. And I would do that all over again.
Alyssa, thank you. And it really sounds like you similarly invested in teachers. You showed them and you told them that this is an investment in you, and we will make it as simple and streamlined as possible for you to do this hard work. Tammy, what were you going to add?
Oh, I was just going to add, I think having someone, a leader like Erica, who does have that capability to have that big vision and set big visionary goals, and having an attitude that we're going to find a way to make this happen. You know, it might take some time, but we're going to find a way to make this happen. And then being able to leverage, kind of like Alyssa said, but being able to leverage the teachers that you know will be early implementers, and the people like both Alyssa and I have been in the district for a while. So we knew our teachers pretty well, and in which buildings could we really leverage some teams to get on board and help be early implementers, so that just kind of creates a swell of interest and more people wanting to get on board.
And I think, one of the things that I really is most important is having a team, and you have different strengths. And I think you see that right here, because Alyssa, Tammy, and I all have 3 very different strengths and skill sets that come together to really make it happen as a whole. And so when I think about implementing this, if we were to implement this just as like, we're going to just do a professional learning session where you're going to implement letters, here are the training dates, this initiative would have failed. And so I think it's a matter of like the relationship piece, making sure you're looking at the systems, but you also have people who are deep into the work and right at the classroom level to also be giving feedback constantly, and to be able to like leverage those relationships, because that's where the magic is, at the classroom level with the classroom teacher. And I think that is the team approach is what made it happen. Because each of us individually, I don't think could have done the same thing without each other. So I think that is the critical piece, is making sure that you have complementary strengths to build it.
That's lovely. Thank you all so much. I know you would agree with me, you will agree with me when I say literacy is so much more than just words on a page. What we want for our kids, what we want for our teachers, is the ability to engage deeply with the world, with their environment, to think critically, to move independently, to pursue the adult life that is theirs to pursue, whether that's college or career. That begins with literacy and a strong foundation. And literacy is also literature and our love of reading. And so as we start to wind down and wrap up this session, I'd love to hear what you are reading for pleasure and what you are reading for joy these days as you do all of this hard work on behalf of the students and teachers of Federal Way, and Alyssa with your new district.
I am, besides a lot of first grade books, I am currently reading, I think it's called The Sky Full of Elephants. Maybe it's just Sky Full of Elephants, by Sibo Campbell. It's what my book club is reading. We meet monthly. And that is my current read. Science fiction. I have recently started it, so I'm still pretty early into it. But it is a hard one for me to put down so far.
The one that's on my list that I just recently heard about is called Unreasonable Hospitality, The Power of Giving People More Than They Expect. And it's about a restaurant that was kind of failing in New York, and they embraced going all in on hospitality and have been named one of the best restaurants in the world. So I've just read a synopsis about it, and it looks very interesting. So I'm interested because we're all kind of in the business of helping people. So I'm looking forward to reading that.
Great.
And mine is Teaching with Fire. It is a collection of poems. And it was ironic that you shared the poem at the beginning, because this is a book that I got it in my admin certification program. And whenever I have a new team or really want to work with the team on there's these poems, the collection of poems, and it always has teacher companion stories of why that poem is so fascinating for them or like a connection for them. And it's around sustaining the courage to teach. And so just recently I pulled it off the shelf and started reading, and I loved hearing your poem at the beginning. So that was great connection there.
That poem by Marge Piercy was actually introduced to me in my teacher preparation program approximately 120 years ago by my mentor teacher, who said, this is how I open every year. Like, we are here to be of use. We are here to turn kids' lives around. They showed up wanting to learn. So we have to show up ready to teach them. Do you have a favorite poem from that collection?
There's a Langston Hughes. I can't remember the actual poem name, but it's very short. And the message is sustaining the courage to just continue. And so that's kind of the message. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, though.
Perseverance. Mine that I just finished that I've been recommending to everybody, it was a gift to me. It's called By Her Own Design. The author is Piper Hughley, and it's historical fiction, but based on fact, of a woman named Anne Lowe, who was a fashion designer to the Social Register of New York. And it's this story of female lineage and strength and love and talent and time and devotion. And there was such warmth and joy and depth to her story. And it was just lovely to meet someone from history whose name has been forgotten, but whose work lives on. So it's sitting here on my desk, but the minute my mom comes to visit me, it's going right to my mom, then right to my bestie. Everybody's waiting to read it. So it was a gift from my dear friend Anne, and I'm so grateful to her. And I'm so grateful to the three of you for the hard work you've been doing for years, for the hard work that you do every single day, for what you brought to our All for Literacy community. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to be here at what is such a challenging time in a school district. We really, truly appreciate you. And I want to thank our participants and our guests. It's really clear that all of us have to work together in order to transform systems and outcomes for kids. If you're a listener today and you found this conversation helpful, please be sure to subscribe. Share this episode with your learning community, your literacy community. Connect with us on social media. Ask us questions. Ask us questions for how to do this work. Give us examples of other stories you want to hear, because we're ready to share the power of the Science of Reading journey. Thank you so much, all of you, for being with us today.